Morant drops 47 in a wild win by the Memphis Grizzlies over the Golden State Warriors. The Boston Celtics roll over the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Lakers are using Phil Jackson as a consultant for their coaching search. What's going on in LA? We break it down in today's episode of Locked On NBA. Let's go.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the daily podcast covering everything you want to know about the association. And on Wednesdays, I'm your usual co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast.
I am Brendon Kleen, host of the Locked On Suns podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Brendon Kleen 14.
All right, this was fun. We always get the best games on Tuesday night. We had a wild win by the Grizzlies over the Golden State Warriors. Boston, I can't tell if they're good or not, or if that was a real big win or not. And we get to make fun of the Lakers today, so it's going to be a great show. So thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, Monday through Friday. No paywall or anything like that. Just breaking down the big stories and the games around the league. So let's jump right into this wild game. 106-101, the Grizzlies over the Golden State Warriors. This one started off with like fireworks and just intensity, with Dillon Brooks committing a flagrant 2 on Gary Payton II in the first 2.5 minutes of this game. So I'm just going to throw it right to you, Brendon. We do real or fake on Wednesdays. Real or fake? That flagrant 2 by Dillon Brooks was dirty.
I don't think it was dirty, but I do think Dillon Brooks is pretty dirty, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that play was like the worst possible thing that I've ever seen on an NBA court or anything like that. I get why Steve Kerr was mad. I feel for Gary Payton, and I hope he's okay, although I'm not super optimistic. But Dillon Brooks has not done himself any favors. And that's the reality. And that was why he, I think, didn't get the benefit of the doubt. I don't know how much he was trying to hurt Gary Payton, though.
Yeah, so that's fair. It seemed dirty, right? Like, he doesn't make a play at the ball. It's a wind-up swipe that makes contact with the head. Payton hits the ground hard, hurts his elbow. We don't have an update on that as of when we're recording. It seemed like it could be some, retaliation for a very tough game one. What I'm ultimately glad about is that it didn't overshadow what was such a fun game led by Morant in the fourth quarter, closing this one out and just being relentless, attacking the Golden State Warriors defense. He had 11 straight points. It might have been 13 straight points for the Memphis Grizzlies in the fourth quarter. He finished with 47 on the night. Like, what just a fun player to watch kind of rise up in these big moments.
Oh, he's a blast. It's exciting to see him also just level by level sort of figure it out. And this performance was linked to the Gary Payton thing. I don't think you can separate the two. It's pretty obvious that Steve Kerr had Payton in that starting lineup for Golden State as a way of having an answer for Ja. And so it doesn't feel coincidental to me that you saw Ja step up at this level without somebody like-sized, athletic, somebody to bother him in that same way. But you have to also give a ton of credit to him. I've always just loved about Ja that he just rarely makes big mistakes. You might see him miss shots, but he just operates so surgically. And he only had 2 turnovers is the other thing to point out there. Just, an all-time night. You saw the stat, I think, going around. Most listeners probably did. Only Kobe and LeBron have had as many 45-point-plus games in the playoffs by this age. So incredible company, incredible performance, and we got an even series.
Yeah, this was just fun. I love these kind of young players rising up. You make a good point, though, right? There was also a period in the first quarter where Draymond Green was back in the locker room after getting a shot to the face. I don't remember if he got stitches or not, but basically the Grizzlies, in a sense, took out the 2 defenders for the Golden State Warriors for that first quarter. And that clearly, they were in control until the fourth when Golden State took a lead before they wrestled it back. They also had a chance, I thought, in the third quarter to kind of put some separation between them and the Warriors and just were unable to. So a couple of bad turnovers led to a 6-0 run for the Warriors during that stretch. Do you trust the rest of Ja Morant's teammates to really kind of carry him forward and this team going forward? Because there were moments I thought in the fourth where I didn't trust Taylor Jenkins with some of the decisions. I thought he left Jaren Jackson Jr. on the bench a little too long. He had 5 fouls, ended up fouling out. They had to rely on a rookie in Zaire Williams to really step up in this, and he did, but that's a guy who had 2 DNPs the 2 previous postseason games they played. So, like, I don't know what to quite make of this Memphis team other than Ja as a hero.
Yeah, I think it's TBD, and I think you can see Taylor Jenkins figuring out, like, who is the first question? Who is even going to be playing in these games? And what I put some notes about this on Twitter, but I think it's really fascinating because it's something we see around the entire league. Not to get too nerdy about it, but you're just seeing a ton of minutes where Ja is playing with Tyus Jones. Because the other special thing about this game from Ja was that Desmond Bane didn't play very well. And he's been kind of that right-hand man, if not the best player in a lot of these games so far during Memphis's run. But in the whole stretch, you've seen Taylor Jenkins putting Ja out there with Tyus Jones, who's normally the backup, a ton. I think it was like less than 4% of the time they were on the floor together in the regular season. It's up past 16% so far in this round, or in the playoffs in general, I'm sorry. So that is an adjustment we are seeing. It's getting more ball handling. It's taking some of the pressure off Ja. Obviously, we know the ball is going to be in his hands at the end. And then, yeah, you have to give it up, though, to some of these young guys who are doing big-time stuff. I mean, Brandon Clark wasn't quite as huge, but there's just so many of these young role players just doing a little bit of everything to supplement the superstar that they're playing with.
Yeah, and that's kind of been their MO for a good chunk of the season when he's been out there, right? Like, these guys have really stepped up and this team has kind of grown. What'd you take away from the Warriors in this game from their perspective with everything? Because I think they probably feel kind of disappointed they ended up losing this game, obviously. And, there's injuries they've got to deal with. They're going to, it does not seem like Gary Payton's coming back for this series, probably, maybe the postseason if they advance. But they don't, I know everyone keeps calling it the death lineup, right? But it is not the same kind of death lineup that they once had.
No, it's not. I think Poole is still, like, I get the excitement about him. I do think this is a player's first playoff series, and Wiggins is a similar guy. There's just not that, they're not veterans. I mean, that might be the best way to put it, right? It's not Andre Iguodala, who's his mid-30s at that point. Also, I feel like Iggy must feel a little disappointed that he just got excommunicated from the lineup. It's his lineup. He's the death lineup. He doesn't even get to be in it anymore. But I think from the Warriors' standpoint, I'm not going to come away from this game all that torn up. I think figuring out who is the guy to guard Ja, if it's not going to be Peyton, figuring out a better plan there without Peyton. But I look at 27 assists. I look at a bunch of missed open threes, and I feel like I was still within 5 on the road, and I still got home court by winning game 1. So I think the Warriors should be perfectly okay outside of obviously just making sure their guys are right. And he flew back, I think, with the team, but X-rays, it doesn't seem like it's headed in a good direction for Gary Payton.
No, and you make a good point about the three-point shooting, right? When you shoot 18.4% from deep and only can go 7 of 38, and the Grizzlies go 14 of 45, and this is going to be a theme in the next game we're going to talk about with the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, yeah, that's at times just a lot to overcome. As you said, it's kind of close. They won one of these games on the road. They've stolen home court advantage. They probably feel good about the adjustments that they can make in this one. And if they figure out, I think, some of their rotations and lineups a little bit too, right? Like, you mentioned the 27 assists, but there were a lot of lineups they had out there where the ball wasn't really moving, and it was just Poole trying to go out ISO and score one-on-one. And that works to a degree, but I think they were bailed out a little bit too by Memphis not having Ja Morant, who at one point couldn't see after getting a shot to the face, or Jaren Jackson Jr. out there on the court. And so they kind of bailed out the Warriors with some rough minutes from them. And I think that's something that could have evened up this game too, potentially.
Yeah, it's a very strange second round series in that both teams, understanding there was the ejection and the injury, but still both teams played 11 guys, I think, if I'm counting correctly. So very bizarre. It's very different than most second round series, and it just shows these teams are both really deep, but that can pose its own problems. And we've seen that with the Warriors forever. Kerr likes to tinker. He likes to get that 15th guy some minutes here and there. He doesn't always settle in until game 5, 6, 7. So this one feels like it's going at least 6, and these teams are very evenly matched. And I think the Warriors probably have more of the rotation adjustments to make here, because I thought also Kuminga looked good. Like, it's hard to know good game to game who's going to be great and who's not going to be. And that's just on Kerr to really just narrow it down.
No, Kuminga was good. I thought he was very good in this. It doesn't jump off at you if you're looking at the box score, but he was pretty impactful when he was out there on the court. Look, you said you think this is going to go 6. I wish this one could go 11, because this series seems like it's going to be really fun, and I'm enjoying this one so much right now. So give me more of these games. So coming up, well, this one was fun. The Boston game, not so much. We'll talk about that coming up here next to today's episode of Locked On NBA. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by Built Bar. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go, and Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. Throw them in your bag, throw them in your kids' backpacks. Make sure everyone has a bar so you are fueled up for your summer adventure. And the best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both. It's that easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it. I eat one of these things every single day, basically for lunch, and I get excited for it because they taste that good, because they put taste first. And you've got to try their Built Puffs. I'm going crazy for these puff bars. They come in crazy flavors like banana cream pie and even churro. I have a box of the churro puff bar. Who doesn't want a protein bar that's light, that's fluffy, that take a churro, and they're only 140 calories. So if that's not enough flavor for you, you might want to try the mix box. The mix box comes with 12 flavors of bars and puffs. So there's something for everyone. So most bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which they taste better than. 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of carbs. All that stuff's bad for you. Go to Built.com, get your favorites. Go to Built.com right now. Use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your next order. Again, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off over at Built.com. And thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Now it's draft season 2 for those teams in the offseason. So make sure you go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by a whole bunch of smart dudes when it comes to the draft, giving you an in-depth look at the NBA draft, running mock drafts, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So while the late game was fun, I cannot explain how much fun that Warriors Grizzlies game was to me. First one, not so much. Boston rolling over the Milwaukee Bucks 109-86. I thought this one really just came down to 3-point shooting. 20 for 43 is what the Celtics shot in this one, 46.5%. The Bucks were just 3 of 18, 16.7%. That's just too big of a hurdle to overcome. And I look at this game and wonder if this could lull Boston into a bit of like a false sense of security, thinking they're kind of far superior to this team.
Yeah, it was a lot was different than game 1. I start with Drew Holiday on the Bucks side, 7 of 20 from the field, 3 turnovers, just 7 assists. He was really good in game 1. He needs to be really good without Chris Middleton in the lineup, who I believe is slated to miss the entirety of this series. I think that may have been basically locked in. So Holiday he just has to be better. On the Boston side, though, it is interesting because this was a game where it was really their 2 superstars. And I love how Jaylen Brown has been able to settle into that number 2 role. That leap by Tatum has almost let Brown play off of everything else a little bit more. And he just seemed really natural with everything today. And then got to give a lot of love to Grant Williams, who was the other big 3-point shooter, like you mentioned, 6 of 9. He was guarding Giannis. He was doing a little bit of everything. And yeah, I don't know how the Celtics go forward from here, but I don't think they should overreact or feel too cocky, because I do think this is a pretty evenly matched series, even without Middleton.
Yeah, this one's weird, right? This one was a bit of a weird game. They just came out firing. You mentioned Jaylen Brown, who had 30 points in this one, and he was awesome. Again, 6 of 10 from 3, 30 total points. but 25 of those came in the first half, and he really struggled with that same kind of shot making. And the Celtics did just overall in the second half, and it allowed the door to remain open for this Bucks team to really kind of get in there. And there was a point with maybe about 6.5 minutes left where it seemed like all of a sudden kind of momentum was with Milwaukee. They might be able to get back into this one because Boston couldn't get inside. And I think they ended up settling a little bit for jump shots in that 3-point shot. They were outscored in the paint significantly. It was 54-24. Just 24 points in the paint with Boston because they couldn't get anything going downhill. Yeah. And if they don't have some of the 3-point shooting they have in this one, like, I don't know, right? Like, it feels like this one, the final score kind of is what it is, but I don't know if it's indicative of where these two teams are at in this one. And like, Giannis was off. You mentioned Grant Williams. He was doing a tremendous job. He was an early sub in for Boston, and he missed his first 6 shots. He didn't score until about like a minute left in the first, I think, on a dunk to really kind of get something going. I mean, it's Giannis, right? Like, is this, and they're a good 3-point shooting team too. They were 5th in the league basically when it came to all of that. I don't know if this is like, it's just kind of like one of those nights, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Boston was able to step up in that second half with just some really good ball movement. And I'm a sucker for assists, so I'm going to get back to it again. 28 for the Celtics, just 16 for the Bucks. We know the Bucks don't play that way, but that's still a pretty stark difference there. I think that's kind of how their offense was able to stay afloat. Tatum played a little better in the second half than he did in the first half. But I think a lot of the offensive comfort, and you look at Derek White, 0 of 6 from the field, 0 of 4 from 3, no free throws for him. I have a real or fake for you, which is the Celtics' ability to win this series if Marcus Smart, who missed the game with a quad injury, is hampered or unavailable. How do you feel about that? Because this is another one, if you're talking about overreacting, where it's like, hold on, they lost the guy and then they won by 23. That's backwards. What do you think?
That's a good one. You know, I think we've seen that they're good enough and they're kind of playing as a team on defense that I say it's real that they can win without him. And I know he's the defensive player of the year. I also think they do have somewhat of an answer. Somewhat, right? Like, I'm going to get killed in the YouTube comments here of like an answer for Giannis, but clearly they were doing a very good job of switching on things with Grant Williams. Horford was handling him okay for the most part too and making him uncomfortable. And the fact that they have those guys, yeah, right? Like, the fact that they have that can really help them. And then the fact that they don't have Middleton for the Bucks, I think is kind of like secret. It's probably not secret. It's a big thing, right? Part of the reason Giannis struggled to get going early is they had the ball in his hands and they didn't really have another guy to kind of create and use it and allow him to play off ball. And it just makes him a little bit harder to, or easier to defend. So I think when you kind of look at that Middleton injury just looms large in this one. And then again, the defense of Boston, who really turned it on in the second half, does seem to kind of have some of the pieces to make life difficult. That's what I'll say for Giannis and the Bucks here.
Well, it makes it difficult, and it also wears Giannis out. And I think that's a big part of it.
He looked tired in this game, by the way. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah, he had that stretch you were talking about right in basically to start the second half where he dented their lead a bit. The Bucks outscored the Celtics by 8 in that third quarter. But it felt like that was kind of his push. And then it was like, all right, guys, like, you know, I'll pass you the baton and you kind of take us from here. And it didn't, there just wasn't anybody to do that. Connaughton had a decent night, but other than that, everybody was pretty below their usual standard in terms of scoring options for the Bucks. So they're going to need to get it from somewhere. I think the Celtics obviously have the advantage right now, but it's Giannis. And I keep coming back to that. If he's just a little better, I think this game looks different. And I think we feel different about the series.
Yeah, if they can find a way to use him off ball more, and Stan Van Gundy was like screaming about it on the broadcast of use him as the screener and kind of a role guy at times. I think that's a pretty good idea, to be honest. He was spot on with that one and just doing anything they can to kind of create a little bit of space for him out there, move him off ball. Also, as you said, give him a break because by the fourth quarter, he looked exhausted. And I don't know if we've really ever kind of seen that from him, but I don't know. Like I look at Boston in this one and I'm like, they made their shots and sometimes that's how it goes. And it's kind of amplified a little bit in the postseason, but I wouldn't feel great if I were them. I wouldn't feel bad. And I don't think it's necessarily like tons of fool's gold here, but there's definitely something to it. This one was a little fluky in my opinion, a little fluky. So the Boston people who listen, because John usually co-hosts with me, are not going to like come at me on Twitter and everything tomorrow.
They may, but look, they're relying a lot on Peyton Pritchard and Derek White right now without Smart in there. Like, I think there's every reason to feel like we don't know what this series will be. I think that's a totally fair thing to say. I think game 3 will teach us a lot, but we are headed back to Milwaukee, and this thing is even. So I don't know if 2 games, like, we necessarily can say, okay, Bucks in 7 or anything like that. It feels very much up in the air.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a fun series too, and hopefully things will closer in this one. So coming up next, we are going to talk about the Los Angeles Lakers and what is going on with their coaching search. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On NBA. And thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Tell a friend about the show too. We're here Monday through Friday breaking down the biggest stories around the league. And leave a 5-star review with a comment. Now you can leave 5-star reviews on Spotify too. That's a new feature they added. So if that's where you listen, please leave a 5-star review for the Locked On NBA podcast. All right, Brendon. I don't think we both love the Los Angeles Lakers here. I don't know how you feel about them, but I can kind of guess. Am I right on that one?
Yeah. If I didn't have any sort of animosity toward them prior to the past couple of years, the Suns playing them in the playoffs last year, Anthony Davis deciding to try to walk on a grave that didn't exist, all that stuff. It's gotten ugly. So yeah, not the biggest fan of the current iteration of the Los Angeles NBA team. Not at all.
Look, and to be honest, I don't know if Lakers fans should get this report coming out today. They're going through a coaching search, and Woj does his thing and says, well, Phil Jackson is heavily involved in the coaching search as a consultant. And he's always had very close ties to that organization, particularly with Jeannie Buss being the owner, former fiance there. He's a trusted and it definitely seems like Jeannie Buss really tries to kind of keep the surface of this, right? This seems like an absolute, and really consult with Phil Jackson on this, because this is a very pivotal hire for them. They really can't screw this up. I don't know if I want Phil Jackson involved in that, to be honest, right now.
I don't think there's any reason why any Lakers fan should be optimistic here. I mean, setting aside the track record, the people involved, the fact that it's Kurt Rambis still, and the Lakers have not done a lot of getting things right outside of getting LeBron James and then paying every single penny and every single cushion for Anthony Davis. All of that aside, Phil Jackson is also a guy who, last we've ever heard, the only thing we have to go from indicates he's not the biggest fan of or friend of LeBron James, right? Like, this is a guy who has a history with LeBron James, whether you want to get into the specifics and talk about the comment he made or whether it was racist or anything. It's just these people don't seem to have a relationship or be close. Why would you put this decision in the hands of somebody who is not plugged into your best players? That doesn't make any sense. It's a franchise that wants to be this like superstar heaven, right? It wants to be, we're the ones who cater to the superstars. Come here. It's going to be heaven for you. This doesn't seem like that. This is firing a coach and then putting a lot of trust in somebody who, what was the last good thing Phil Jackson did in the NBA? It's bizarre. It doesn't seem like it's headed down a path that's going to satisfy LeBron and Anthony Davis. We don't know who the coach will be, but step one here doesn't seem super promising at all.
No, and you look at his tenure with the Knicks, right, where they had unlimited money to spend, and it was a disaster under his 3-year tenure there. Derek Fisher was not a good head coach there, right? He then brought in Jeff Hornacek, who was basically fired because that team was ready to mutiny under him and everything, right? Like, there is some big trouble there with the decisions he's made before. And like, it goes back to the Lakers, like, as you said, right? The superstar Showtime Lakers, they have this glitz and glam around them, but they're run like a mom and pop business because they kind of are, right? You have all of this money, but don't really spend it, but maybe you don't. And like, instead of just hiring like a coaching consultant firm, those always get hired in these. So we're going to try and do it kind of on the cheap with a friend of the organization in Phil Jackson, and one that doesn't have a great track record of this. And like, that seems to be a little bit of a mistake here, right? Like this is an organization that, is just so intent on like keeping things in house. And I don't really know why. Again, do the Rambi really need to be that involved on a day-to-day basis with this? And that doesn't seem like they should be, right? And it's kind of like USC did it for a long time too with their football team, right? They just kept hiring, and their athletic directors just kind of kept hiring former Trojans to kind of keep it in the same city. And like at a certain point, you need to kind of like broaden your horizons and like diversify in terms of breadth of it, like the voices you have, I think.
Absolutely. It sounds like they should hire somebody like Frank Vogel, actually, but I'm not saying he's the best coach ever. I don't know if his offensive system was left a lot to be desired. I think we all know that, but he won there and he wasn't cut from that cloth, and he was able to still earn the respect of the locker room and everything else. His relationship with Russell Westbrook seemed not great. I get all of it, but I don't get the moving away from Vogel in the first place, especially if your follow-up move is going to be to just do the same thing you've always done. But I do want to give a little bit of credence, because I'm sure Lakers fans are already going crazy hearing me talk. There is this sort of under-the-radar thing going on here, if you follow the tea leaves, that Phil Jackson has a relationship, and it's public, with Nick Nurse. Apparently they got close during the Raptors championship run in 2019. They spent time together. Phil was around that Raptors team purportedly. And so there is some potential that maybe that gets them closer, although we did just have Masai Ujiri say that the Lakers can keep dreaming about that possibility coming to fruition. So it feels like we're headed toward the same old place the Lakers always go. Names, connections to their stars maybe, but I don't have a lot of faith that this is going to be some home run, super imaginative hire and they're going to get the next genius coach. It just, why would we think that's going to happen?
No, I'm with you. And like, they're kind of linked to one of them. Darvin Ham's been a name as those kind of like up and coming assistants that's been linked to the team, but he's also been linked to other teams, right? Charlotte was a name that's linked with him too, that'll probably interview with, I having just covered 3 head coaching searches here in New Orleans, I'm quite familiar with him. And I think he's going to be a good NBA head coach, but it also seems like they're going to just like do the due diligence on the wrong guys, take too long and lose out on someone like that, right? Like they're going to probably spend some time interviewing Mark Jackson. Are they waiting for the Philadelphia 76ers to get bounced from the playoffs so that they can talk to Doc Rivers? And if you're a Laker fan, like that should worry you, I think, to a certain degree, because as you said, right, like it just feels like they're going to end up doing kind of the same old names, go for these guys. Like some of these leaks are so very clearly coming from the Lakers that we've seen. There was one I saw the other day where it was like, oh, players are really impressed by Mark Jackson winning Rookie of the Year in like the late 80s, as if any of them know that. I didn't even know he won Rookie of the Year, to be honest, till I saw that. Right? Like the players don't care about that. Like the people putting those leaks out are either his agents or like the Lakers camp to try and make this look a little bit better. And it's so like ridiculous, right? Or maybe it was the Kings were trying to kind of float that one out there, but still, like if that's the type of stuff you're trying to like hold up a candidate with, it might've been the Kings.
If that's the name you're talking to, I mean, like, I'm not saying Mark Jackson is an awful coach either, but it's exactly the same type of thing. And Doc Rivers falls into that too. I'm not saying you have to reinvent the wheel to win with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. That's far from the truth. You could probably get by with a mediocre coach and be pretty good if all things work out and those guys get healthy and they can rebuild the roster. But why shoot yourself in the foot in that way? Why try guys who have already failed elsewhere, in some cases multiple times, when you have the opportunity, you have this appealing destination, you have these superstar players? I thought the Quinn Snyder thing made some sense. It's at least a little bit more of an interesting way to go, but now you have reports from Bleacher Report he might not want to go there. So it doesn't feel like there's a lot of answers with the Lakers search right now. And I just come back to, we'll probably get news in a couple weeks that it's a name we've heard before that Jeannie and Phil and the Rambi checked off on. And, we'll roll it out in October. And I don't know if it'll go better. I don't know what the plan is. And that's been the case with the Lakers for, how long? Since Kobe retired? Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, a long time now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute. You make a good point, though. They're not going to be bad. LeBron and Anthony Davis can definitely carry you pretty far when everyone's healthy, which they definitely weren't this season. All right, let's wrap it up on this. Real or fake? You basically just said it. The Lakers are going to nail this coaching hire.
Well, it depends on what the the criteria are. I mean, I think there's a version of this
That's
team,
fair.
probably one without Russell Westbrook, that could be good again, that could make the playoffs. I guess that would represent an improvement from this season when they didn't do that. But I don't think the coach, unless they do go out of their comfort zone, I just don't see the coach being the reason for that. And that's maybe true.
Fair.
Maybe you think in the NBA that's almost always true. It doesn't really matter who your coach is. If you have great players and they play well together, you're going to win. If not, then you're not. But I just think you have the opportunity to build and get something like that in the building, get a mind who can make your players better. And it doesn't seem like they have a lot of interest in it. So I guess in my view, they're going to lose it. But if they're the 4th seed next year, no one will be super surprised. And I guess that would be a win.
That's actually a really good point. I get what you're saying. Like they just don't completely screw it up is probably the name of the game for the Lakers right now, as you kind of said there. So yeah, but I still think it's fake that they're going to nail this coaching search. They'll be fine, but it's not going to be the most inspiring hire or the guy that's going to be like, that's the reason, like Nick Nurse, right? Like that's the reason, all of that stuff. That would be big, but they're not going to get that. They're not going to end up doing that. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On NBA. Thank you all for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. And on Wednesdays, I'm your co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast.
And I am Brendon Kleen, the host of the Locked On Suns podcast, at Brendon Kleen 14 on Twitter.
Thank you all for listening. We'll be back with you all next week.